When was the last time you browsed in the bookstore? Whether that's a brick and mortar bookstore, do we still have those? There are a couple around. We in Central Kentucky actually have that option. Many places they don't anymore. When was the last time you browsed up one aisle and down the other in the bookstore? Or if you prefer to make purchases online, when was the last time as you were purchasing a text online that you looked at the bottom of the page and paid attention to that section that says, others who browsed here bought this, or others who bought this, bought that, and made a referral somewhere at the bottom of your page before you refreshed and move on. The argument is made that some time ago, 20 or 30 years ago, if you were to browse in a bookstore and go to the self-help section and or the spirituality section, you would have found titles that were assuring you of your best life, that everything imaginable is attainable for you if you will just learn and apply these simple steps. Career, relationship, accomplishment, whatever it may be, you can have it. Just read this text. By contrast, the argument is made that today, if you were to go to that same location and browse those same aisles within that same section, you would run across texts that were more likely to tell you that you could be pulled up out of the depths of your low self-esteem if you'll just learn these simple steps. At least that's the argument that opens our text for our Sunday night book study that we'll be beginning later on this evening. Ken Shigematsu is the author. He is a best-selling author. His first book went big. He's also the pastor of a downtown church in Vancouver and has written a book about the spiritual disciplines. He begins by suggesting that there's been a change in emphasis in the self-help and maybe even in the spirituality sections of your local bookstore, whether it's in person or online. And he contends that matters of stress and self-esteem are at the heart of American spirituality today. I don't know if he's right about the percentages. I don't know if he's right that you'd be more likely to find a different sort of text today than you would have 25 years ago. But I do know that I have plenty of conversation with folks who are unpacking their stress and dealing with their self-esteem. And that's nothing new. The idea is that a culture, a society that inundates us with messages that we can have it all, is also breeding a sort of culture out of which we would feel depression, guilt, even shame, when we cannot and do not have it all. I'm reminded of the star student who moved back home to Central Kentucky and showed up here one morning for worship. And we went to lunch after the service, and he started to tell me about the grant that he had received and how wonderful it was that the school that had granted him admission into their doctoral program some years ago had also given special financing for his dissertation work. And he said, I could go anywhere in the world supported by this funding, and I chose to come back home to Central Kentucky because, after all, when I finish this thing, it's not likely I'll get a job out of it anyway. This is a young man who was rising to the highest levels of academic success. And though he had not gotten sick of his dissertation topic and was still going to write the thing and finish the project, he had no sense that it would open any doors professionally for him. Shigematsu writes, many of us understand intellectually that we are loved by God. But in our day-to-day experience, we continue to base our value on our success, our outward appearance, and how others view us. I would add some variation to his diagnosis. I would say there are many of us who also fall prey to the false projection of self that is out there among our neighbors and our friends and our online friends and the other drivers in the drop-off and pickup line and the folks who seem to look so put together when they walk out to the bus stop or when they run in to pick up a few items in the grocery store. A lovely doormat outside a house doesn't in any way indicate a home that is at peace within itself. Shigematsu even writes of himself. He says, it's not only that I wonder whether I put forth enough effort. It's not only that I wonder whether I put forth enough effort to impress my peers. It's not only if I wonder if I appear to be busy enough to people who are workaholics and successful in their workaholism. It's not just that I wonder if I have achieved enough accomplishment. He writes, I wonder if I am enough. I wonder if I'm enough, he says. And then he writes about habits. Some of you have heard me talk about my little family's experience this summer as we moved across town to a new house, a new home. And the experience for me, and hopefully you have heard that we could not pull it off. We did not pull it off. We failed in our effort, and yet we were so far into it, we were committed that we were completely stuck. And since I seemed to be completely incapable of asking for help, it was a dear friend and deacon, the wonderful Christy Bray, who recognized the Reddits need help, and Alan doesn't have the sense to ask for it. And so Christy picked up the phone, thankfully, and started calling in reinforcements, and y'all showed up and bailed us out, and I appreciate that so much. But after that, once we were getting settled in, or supposed to be theoretically, some of you know that I underwent a season of grief. And it wasn't simply the grief that accompanies leaving the house where we have made a home for 9 years, and we've brought home 2 little bundles of joy and given them bot-bots and rocked them and all of this, all of the wonderful things that happen in that home. What I realized pretty quickly, or actually I should say what I realized eventually after wondering what was going on for some time, is that I was grieving not only the loss of place and memories in that place, but I was grieving the loss of habit. I was grieving the loss specifically of the routines associated with that location. And I was completely caught off guard. I seem to have been functionally unaware of just how ingrained many of those routines and habits were in my life. And so what it meant for me was when I could no longer simply mindlessly retrace my steps that I would go through every night, making the coffee for the next morning and setting the timer and walking back and forth between the front door and the locked doors. I'm not usually neurotic, but apparently in my life I have to lock the front and back doors about 4 times each and check them over again before I can go to bed. Or the way that I would sneak in and check on the girls and not wake them up and pull up the covers and sneak back out and all of these sorts of things. The next morning, the way that I would go downstairs and mindlessly get my coffee and make a little note of things that we were running short on and go upstairs and go through my morning get ready routine. I was not at all aware of what a crutch, and not just a crutch, but what a meaningful contribution to my sense of place that these little routines held for me. And most especially, I didn't realize how deeply I had become attached to the routines associated with the girls. and how I was going to struggle when I couldn't put them down at night in the new place the same way that I had for months and months and years in the old place. And I mean, I grieved this. I mean, I kind of wandered around looking even more pitiful than usual. And took some time to write it down because, kind of like he's saying, the difference between what you know and what you feel, I knew in my mind very quickly that new routines would emerge. Eventually, Megan would unpack things because I'm too lazy to help with that. I helped a little. Eventually, we would settle in and new routines would start to emerge. I knew that, and I knew there would be value in the new routines, and I knew they would become special as well. But I also knew that it was going to make me terribly sad when the time came that I couldn't really remember the old routines as sharply as I wanted to. And so I took some time and I wrote them down, particularly the ones about the girls. I tried to capture even the little way of how I would lie on the floor and which side I would lie on and how I'd reach up and pat their backs and all this sort of business. I had no idea how much those habits had sort of wrapped around me like a cloak of safety and security, like a garment to be worn. And after all, that's what a habit is. For a nun, for a person who has taken on an oath of certain behaviors in certain community, a habit is a garment that person puts on. And that informs the importance of the habits that you and I have in our routines and in our schedules, but also in just the way we mindlessly move through our world. A habit is something that we wear, Shigematsu writes. I thought of that again when I heard it from my friend yesterday in South Carolina. And he said, we had to leave the house today. We've been back and forth talking about what's going on in the coastal regions of South Carolina and North Carolina. They live 12 miles inland from Myrtle Beach in the community where I served, in the community where Pastor Heather served. And I knew that they had evacuated and they had gone back and they were waiting for the river to rise. And I knew that the church 1 block away from their house was the lead photo at the top of an NPR article about folks waiting with anxiety for the waters to rise. And I knew that it was really bad when the President of the United States stopped the motorcade at the end of the block and got out and walked down the street and stopped in front of their house to talk to them. That's when you know the weather has been really bad in your area. And they were waiting for the waters to rise, and the waters rose, and they got all the way across and into the sanctuary of that church, and they've been hauling the pews out, trying to go get them ready to be treated and protected, and the waters rose. And so my friend and that family started loading stuff up on the first floor as the water came up under the crawl space, and they started carrying it upstairs and started trying to find places to stack it. And when the water came up over the threshold of the home and started across the floor on the first floor, they walked out on the porch and they closed the door behind them and they locked it. And they went and they stayed last night in the trailer, in a trailer parked in the front driveway of a friend who lives at slightly higher elevation. I can't imagine the disruption to the routines in that life and in that household. Paul Prather wrote about it earlier at the end of last week. He talked about being cranky toward those who interfere with what he calls his beloved routines. I can't imagine the crankiness on steroids associated with fleeing for the safety of your family. But what we know is that habits are powerful. And just as positive habits can reinforce positive thinking and so on and so forth, so it is true that destructive choices breed destructive habits, and destructive habits breed destructive habits, and destructive habits breed destructive habits, and on and on and on it goes. once we start thinking linearly down that road in a fur piece, it is difficult to shift course, to change track, and come back. When are you going to get to the Scripture, preacher? Let's go there now. Psalm 51. Verse 10, an old friend, one of those passages that Miss Donna taught me in Bible drill. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me. Or as you may have memorized it years ago, renew a right spirit within me. Friends, your self-esteem is a habit. That's the idea behind this text that we'll be studying on Sunday night. In some part, your self-esteem is a habit. Prather wrote about it last week, learning holy habits, one better decision at a time, until hopefully it comes naturally. Apparently is going to be his life work, he says. He says, I'm 62, and I still have to strain and struggle to make one right choice. But hopefully someday it'll come more naturally to me, he says. And so, in my life, having lost all of these habits that I didn't know were a crutch and I didn't realize were so meaningful to me in this transition in our household, I'm trying to make some new habits. We can't do the nighttime routine the same way anymore because nothing's laid out the same, and that's fine. It's a new season of life. They even did the season finale of Sophia the First. That's the first time I've said that out loud. I can't hardly bear myself to believe it. It is the end of an era in our house. So, in the car that I drive every morning to the school to drop off, in the drop-off lane, there's a new item that is stored there. And it's a children's Bible. And every morning when we drive up and get stopped in the drop-off lane, we have about 6 or 7 minutes until the line starts moving forward. And we sit there and put it in park and read 2 or 3 Bible stories and have a word of prayer. And we're learning this new holy habit as a way of commissioning a child to drop off at the front door, to go and be a light, to reflect God's goodness, as I trust she does. As we study this book on Sunday nights and as we reflect on it on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights, it's my hope that we will learn some ways to hear the whisper of the Holy Spirit. Some of these are familiar, things like meditation, things like Sabbath, which you and I talk about all the time, things like gratitude, but also things like simplicity. Who and where and when in our culture do we talk about simplifying things as more than just a passing thought? Servanthood, friendship, vocation. These are holy habits that Shigematsu is going to introduce or reintroduce in our lives. In conclusion this morning, I just continue to go back to his comment, I wonder if I'm enough. I wonder if I'm enough. With all the success, with all the accolades, with all the sales, with all the growth in this downtown church, with all that is happening, Shigematsu writes, I wonder if I am enough. And the author of the foreword, a woman named Ann Voskamp, says, when I got this text, I read it through, and I reread it through, and I took out pen and paper, and I jotted in the margin, and I underlined, and I took notes, and I highlighted, and then I sat back and exhaled. I exhaled. When was the last time you let out a deep, satisfying, cleansing breath as you rested in the presence of our God? When was the last time your soul exhaled. Child of God, you are enough. Child of God, I am enough. Would you say that with me? Child of God, you are enough. Child of God, I am enough. Again, child of God, you are enough. Child of God, I am enough. For the Lord has made you and declared you so, and is making within you something new and right, and dare we say, holy. This morning, if you want to surrender to just such a walk with Him, to receive Jesus into your life for the very first time and begin walking after Him, walking in His way, learning the way of the disciple, we want to give you an opportunity to do so. Our musicians are going to lead us in a time of response. We would welcome you to come forward as we sing and to share what's on your heart this morning, a prayer, a decision, a need, a response. Others may be recognizing that it's for you a season in which you need to be renewed, that a new heart, a new creation needs to come within you. You've perhaps been interested in Jesus for some time. You've been asking questions for some time. Perhaps have even been worshiping within the local congregation for a long time, but have never yielded to the work of the Spirit of the living God within your life. If today you recognize that it's time for this to happen, we would love to celebrate and pray over you and walk alongside you for years to come. Friends, we hope that many of us will study this Bible together, this book together, but much more than that. It's our hope and prayer that each and every one of us, that all in the life of this church, would come to know that wonderful, renewing, recreating work of Christ within. However you need to respond to the work of the Holy One in your life, we stand and we sing in hopes that you'll come.